the space is definitely getting to the point where there's just a lot of real applications touching real users, and and to the point where it's actually viable for that sort of thing.
We're waiting for the tech to come together, but we're also waiting for society to be able to accept and learn and be able to start adopting these things. And the thing is, once they're out, you can't put them back in the box.
When we say we're going to change the world, right? Tell me how we're changing the world relative to things like vaccine researchers. So we need to increase the efficiency with which we deliver change.
I think that we're going to be accelerating towards a future in which there is an open source financial system, but I don't exactly know what that horizon looks like. I just know the world is changing very quickly and it's accelerating, not decelerating.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Palmer, and these are just a few of the ideas that we're going to explore in this show on the state of the Ethereum ecosystem. Mid-February of 2020, some of the most interesting personalities in Ethereum gathered in Denver, Colorado for ETH Denver. And I took this opportunity to have some conversations and to record them so I could share them with you today.
It's not about blockchain and the tech and which blockchain is it. It's about the job to be done, which is about programmatic trust and coordinating stakeholders. And so you've seen in the last decade, there's been $24 billion of capital from venture investors and retail investors that have poured into this industry in an attempt to A/B test where and in what industry is programmatic trust useful.
The first sector where blockchains and programmatic trust have tremendous value is in finance.
Right now, what works is if you think about it all financial. It's transnational stores of value, be it BTC or Ethereum. It's capital formation. Think about ERC20 and the ICO movement. There were very interesting aspects to this financial phenomenon that we want to see coming back. And third is asset-backed and stable coins that are really the killer apps of crypto.
There are a bunch of different projects in the space that are creating interoperable tools that collectively have become known as decentralized finance, or DeFi.
We have money Legos in Ethereum. You can walk into a hackathon like ETH Denver and you can build on stable coins like MakerDAO's DAI, and you can build on things like Compound that allow you to build to earn interest trustlessly on top of DAI. And so we're going to see projects that used to take banks $20 million to launch. A group of hackers are going to launch in a weekend at Ethereum Denver.
You know, within 2 minutes, 5 minutes, you have access to incredibly powerful financial applications like lending and borrowing, margin trading, derivatives. Now you can take out insurance. Now you can stream money, you know, in your bedroom instantly without anyone gatekeeping. You know, it's amazing.
A parallel technologically enforced legal system can completely change the developed economy's approach to systemic financial risk, which I think is going to be very significant, and people are going to pay a lot more attention to when there's going to be another downturn or correction or crisis or whatever you want to call it, and that's when this issue is going to become very important in those markets. And in emerging markets, I think the capacity to give people a mobile phone and access to the internet, and through that now give them access to all kinds of financial products and insurance and things that people absolutely take for granted, but underpin the stability of their life, and giving that to people that don't have it is really a world-changing thing, in my opinion.
There are several key areas where blockchain and crypto projects are working with legacy institutions to build the bridges necessary for the ecosystem to continue to grow.
And we're basically putting together the foundation of the next economy. However, the current banking system doesn't support blockchain or crypto. If you're trying to grow a business, even in this economy, you still have to do things like merchant services, you have to make payroll, and so you are under the current risk strategy for banks. These two industries are considered high risk and therefore are not bankable. And so this is a solution to that. And that's why we're using a digital asset framework as well as fiat currency. We are tied in because of the state charter with the Federal Reserve, and so that gives us access to international monetary rails.
The idea is to build digital identities for physical things, and those digital identities are recognized by the legal system as being definitive legal records. So when you update those records, it's a legally binding activity, and that means when you do something like change ownership, a court will recognize that transfer of ownership. And that system is quite a lot of legal legwork and also quite a lot of technical legwork, and the integration between the two things is quite tricky. But once it's done, you get this magic result where you update the smart contract and the stuff changes ownership.
The problem that we're working on is expanding the functionality of smart contract code such that it could interact with external events. So well, we've successfully done that already. So we have price reference data networks, we have data for insurance. So now somebody can build an insurance contract or a financial product that's completely decentralized in the sense that the computation of the logic happens on a system like Ethereum, and then the data is received from a system like Chainlink from multiple different sources, such that the decentralized security guarantee that people want from smart contracts, it extends all the way, end to end, all the way to a data source.
As the internet has evolved, with the rise of social media being classified as Web 2.0, a lot of people are looking at where things go from here. And that whole field has become known as Web 3.
We're starting to get to that point where we're starting to become conscious of how our information is shared and how that might not be what we want. And so I have faith in humanity that we'll eventually get to this sort of new way of thinking where I'm the origin point of all my information. I should have at least some ownership over it.
Self-sovereign identity is an outcome of a lot of different pieces sort of working together, realizing the actual vision of Web3. A greater level of user choice and agency and control over their assets and their things online. And whether that's their assets on Ethereum, and they can control them with their private key, or their data, on all of these different systems. I think of a user not even knowing they really have a self-sovereign identity, but it's just the way that apps store their data. And then a user shows up at a different app and that app is able to request access to some information and the user just says okay, and then the app magically populates full of all of its context and information. And so you don't have these onboarding problems that you have today. I'm not recreating accounts and regenerating data every single time. And so you get sort of composability through data in the same way as Ethereum does for money. And so instead apps can take existing data and add to it in their own way and make different experiences, produce data that others can use. And so just basically providing control and interoperability.
So with the frameworks for some of these decentralized identity systems in place, there's some real-world applications that are really impactful.
An application, a consumer-facing application, that has your money, like a MetaMask Mobile or Argent or something like that, that also has the power of DIDs, or decentralized identifiers, and credentials. So what this opens up is a lot of the use cases if you take DeFi, for example. DeFi has this kind of a big use case that we can't do yet, which is under collateralized loans. The DeFi application can decide a new basis for how you want to verify somebody is deserving of whatever loan agreement, right? So maybe it's being able to prove educational credentials. Maybe it's you have a credential from the UN, and this gets you access to different rates on these DeFi things. So all of those use cases start opening up, and I think that's going to be important.
A really promising use case for the technology is what's known as a DAO, or a decentralized autonomous organization. And the concept here is that the technology provides a transparent governance layer for a group of individuals to coordinate along shared objectives without a central authority.
What it really looks like is communities coming together, finding a cause that they believe in, adding value to that good, that public good, and receiving a return, being rewarded for the production of value. And that's generally the strategy. Incentive alignment for every actor in the system. When you build a system, a DAO, the cultural build is 10x more important than the technical build. It's so funny how people think you can just deploy a DAO and everything will magically work.
It's not just make a proposal and vote up or down with some random hex addresses. Now it's 99% of the community interaction on these platforms might be chatting and messaging and sort of actually interacting as a group, and then the outcome of those interactions are a quick vote.
It's really important to make them not have to purchase crypto to use the system. if they can just earn cryptocurrency by doing different tasks inside the system and kind of build their account over time by participating in the organizations, I think in many cases people have a lot more time than they do money. And giving them options where they can spend their time for other types of money that they're interested in, I think is a net positive for a lot of people.
One specific type of application for this decentralized coordination mechanism is the funding of public goods.
Quadratic funding as a thing, I think, has a lot of disruptive potential right now, and we've been seeing even within the Ethereum ecosystem, and the results have been really great so far.
So quadratic funding is a concept that's being tried out on Gitcoin.co, especially related to the grants process there, which is dedicated to funding open source software. And essentially, the concept comes from Glenn Weil's book Radical Markets, and the core concept of it is that a pool of funds can be distributed according to public interest in a fair and equitable way.
It is our goal to do more consistent, bigger Gitcoin grants rounds, and we would love to create instead of 1 or 2 quadratic freelancers, we'd love to create a dozen to 100 quadratic freelancers that are just working on ETH2, are working on public goods, are working on the commons.
So with all of this, mutable data sources and public ledgers and things like that, the issues of privacy become really serious really quickly.
To talk about privacy, we first have to talk about the emergent property of cyberpunk metaphysics, that information wants to be free. It has this innate desire to be free. I mean, there are some people who I think don't really believe that, and that's okay. But what I'm trying to hone in on in bringing this up is the idea that working on privacy is somehow in defiance of that law of internet metaphysics. I think that at first blush it might seem that way because, well, why are you keeping something private? It wants to be open, it wants to be read and seen. But the truth of the matter is that these two are not only not incompatible, but they are profoundly complementary, because one of the reasons that great ideas or poignant truths don't make it to the corpus of open human knowledge described in the dataist paradigm is self-censorship, fear of retribution, even fear of embarrassment in some cases, but certainly whatever the reason is, we know that people refrain from espousing good ideas on the basis alone that those good ideas will cause them to have to put up their defenses. And so privacy is a way to take inventory of those defenses as an idea makes its egress from the theater of the mind to the forums of public opinion. Cryptographic primitives that have been bootstrapped by the sudden availability of funding for research that's been made available largely by the growth of Bitcoin, it seems to be empowering in very real situations to people who were insufficiently connected to have a stake not that long ago.
I think, having something that's interesting to the cypherpunks in blockchain and cryptocurrencies and something that the enterprise uses, it provides a bridge for them to meet. Because traditionally with the cypherpunks and the enterprise corporations, there was no common useful end that aligned with both their interests.
But if this really is going to be a system that's built for everyone, by everyone, then we really have to figure out ways to be more inclusive.
Decentralization inherently is diverse, right? So we don't have a single point of, let's say, of influence on the way technology works. So we should also try to do the same with the people who are building it.
What we've seen over the past several years in the ecosystem is, there was a number of projects or prototypes built, and they've been built by techie guys, And when you look at them, they optimize for themselves, for the way they think. In order for greater adoption of this product to occur, and I'm assuming all these projects it won't be successful, you need a perspective of people who are not people like them.
One really interesting way that the ecosystem could be growing is through the use of no-code platforms.
ETH Build is like this kind of a workbench where you can drag and drop
these nodes and then wire them up together, and they can run basically a sophisticated dApp, all just kind of like visually, right? I'm not programming here, I'm just visually setting stuff up, but what I'm doing is building a program that can be executed over and over again. And it's like this really nice way to quickly prototype something. You probably wouldn't put it into production, but it teaches you, is this gonna work? I'm thinking about this thing, or maybe how does this contract work? I can just drop the smart contract in and kind of just wire up and play with it.
So these types of rapid prototyping environments are great for hackers, but they're also being implemented by corporations in order to see innovation inside of their business.
Within BP, we have the Digital Innovation Organization, which is a group of about 30 of us. What we were looking for was no-code platforms. So we wanted to get this in front of the people that handle our taxes, the people that handle our procurement and contracts, and allow them to actually build what they want. So we collaborated with a company called Trium out of Consensus, who's built a no-code platform that allows business users to plot their business processes. The results of that is we got over a dozen new use cases. We had this incredible cross-function collaboration that we hadn't had before in these kind of projects. And users could present a sort of MVP to their leadership.
So just to be clear though, the enterprise implementations of Ethereum are generally not running on the public blockchain, but these are forked versions of the Ethereum code base running private networks.
From a blockchain perspective, from the immutability to the security to the improvements from an identity perspective, really enterprise Ethereum is going to enable a lot of the organizations, the way their businesses and their frameworks are ultimately run, to have a big evolutionary shift to really a more secure environment for the future.
There's a lot of different ways that programmatic trust can have an impact on the way that humans interact with each other.
I've been calling this the democratization of business. And if you can partake in an economy and a product and a service that's democratized, would you want to do that where you have more say and power, and assuming you're not giving up efficiencies and quality of service, and you get more benefits, more price, more control over the data? It's community-run businesses with open source software and open source community shepherding the code and payment structures that work across the board, and that is unstoppable to me.
What's really exciting are some of the really impactful ways that this plays out for real humans in the real world.
When you buy something expensive, think of camera equipment. There's usually an intention to resell it at some point in the trajectory, right? But the price you get in the aftermarket is very dependent on a bunch of trusted guesswork about the condition of the goods. Hey, buy my camera, it's fine. By the way, my eBay reputation is 80%. Not so much, right? So what we are trying to do is build a much more objective way of assessing second-hand goods, right? And this includes collectibles. You take the object, you take it to an expert, they assess the health of the object, they write you a warranty on the condition of the object, and then when the object is sold, the new owner can buy the warranty, and that gives them cover if the object isn't as described. By having that person or persons in the loop, because it can be multiple layers, you get a much more objective review of the conditions of the goods, which means you get much closer to fair value. So when we come to the sale, you know exactly what you're getting, we both know what that's worth, nobody has any reason to doubt the other party and then drop their price to compensate for the doubt. This we call the doubt discount. And once you eliminate the doubt discount, durable goods like cameras are basically in the same condition decades after they were built. Those goods are retaining their value because people know exactly what they're buying and the doubt discount is minimal because it's a high trust sale environment. But that could be true for almost everything, right? And what it changes is the incentives for producing temporary goods like fast fashion. That no longer looks like a good idea, and this hugely reduces environmental impact and it reduces the risk of being first buyer.
There are certain problems that a blockchain seems uniquely qualified to solve, and climate change is one of those.
Using things like NFTs just for certificates, and are there ways to fit that together into some way, a solution for, say, rewarding people who are solving climate change or something like that? Yeah, there's just a whole bunch of experiments doing a lot of really interesting things.
We don't really have the methods currently in terms of private markets to be able to internalize the cost, those negative externalities. So that's how we get tragedies of the commons through. It's a free resource basically is how we're treating our climate, how we're treating our environment. Blockchain allows us to actually track that, quantify that impact, and create multiple two-sided marketplaces to reduce those externalities and offset them, as well as track them and then price them into the cost of a transaction. So blockchain is this method of generating that trust, because only with that trust are you going to be able to sell and buy a carbon token that can actually, everyone in the system can trust that actually removed 1 ton of carbon from the ecosystem. We really will need to have an interoperable standard between nations, because climate change and these other global externalities really are global problems that need to be solved on that level.
I think 2020 stands as a year where a lot of this technology matures to the point where it's actually usable, as people have talked about, where privacy takes a front seat, where data and some of these issues become mainstream. And I think that Ethereum is in a great place to be poised to be an effective solution to the challenges that are facing our global culture.
It just feels like we're all building together. And there's like this weird thing with Ethereum where it's like, oh yeah, well, we can all plug into each other. So we really are, even though we're all working on our own projects, we really are building together.
If I can take something from someone and not be able to have any knowledge over its contents, and yet do something useful for that person, I think unambiguously this is empowering to the very populations that have been underserved by the orthodox internet.
If we're going to be doing, large-scale blockchain projects in partnership with state government, if we're going to be having regulatory change to enable blockchain projects to thrive in progressive states like Colorado and Wyoming, we have to be able to perform at the level that goes with that sort of responsibility. But now that we've got much more friendly partnerships with government, that will remove a lot of the uncertainty, and that should ratchet down some of the areas where doubt has crept in and people have stayed back rather than actually really engaging, really investing, and really getting results.
There's new cases that we hadn't seen coming 6 months ago, and I'm really looking forward to the next 6 months and seeing what pops out that we hadn't imagined and what we can do around that.
If we can open the door to anyone with an internet connection to be able to earn $5 or $10 a day for giving their time, that can make a huge impact in people's lives.
Good user experience. If you want to build something, have a great user experience and keep the power in control to your users.
Creating a greater demand for the technology from developers to create a greater supply of applications that give users control of their data to ultimately result in more users owning their data. I think that's the way that we're going to go.
We have this really interesting and powerful technology that is going to be disruptive, and for the next few decades this thing is going to be this this fascinating work of technology. So I already have something awesome to show someone. I just need to figure out the way I show them, right? It's not like I need to sell someone something or convince them that this thing, is cool. It is cool. It's objectively rad.